What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over the top 5 wide receivers you should have drafted. If you have not yet had your draft, then you can use this as a final list of our wide receivers you should be targeting, so use that to your advantage. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was among wide receivers with 40 plus targets last season, which wide receiver had the highest quarterback rating when targeted? The correct answer was Mecole Hardman. Congratulations to Will Cozine, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day though, of wide receivers last season, who led the league in air yards per game? So once again, that's of all wide receivers in 2019, who led all of them in air yards per game? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, if you have not yet drafted, be sure to check out our draft package. It is available at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Obviously, we don't have all of the time to break down every player on video, but we do have player breakdowns on all draftable players available at our website. You will also gain access to the list of our sleepers, targets, busts at every stage of the draft. We have offensive line rankings, consistency charts, risk ratings, and more. So if that interests you, go to our website. Once again, it's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link as always in the description box below. With that out of the way though, let's hop right into the video. The first player we're going to go over is none other than DJ Chark of the Jacksonville Jaguars. While many people in the community are pretty high on DJ Chark, I don't particularly know many people that are straight up avoiding him. I still don't think we're giving him enough credit for exactly what he was able to accomplish in 2019. He played in 15 games, had 118 targets, converted that into 73 receptions for over 1,000 receiving yards to go along with 8 receiving touchdowns. That's very impressive, but we do know he sort of had a tale of two seasons. He was much hotter to start the year off through the first 8 games, but he did slow down towards the second half. But there were still 2 major factors that did impact the overall loss in production. There was the ankle sprain that he did suffer towards the tail end of the season, and also the transition from Gardner Minshew to Nick Foles. The connection and chemistry that he did show throughout the early part of the season with Gardner Minshew, it was much better than what we saw at least at the early part with Nick Foles. Through the first 8 games of the season, DJ Chark scored 123.5 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. That would be good for over 65% of his entire season's production. But through that span, he was on an absolute tear. If you're looking at fantasy points per game, he was averaging 15.4, which if sustained for an entire season would have been good for a top 9 fantasy finish over any season since 2016. Last season, it would have been good for a top 5 wide receiver finish, but we did see a bit of a reduction on the high end of production from wide receivers. But like I said, since 2016, it still would have been top 10 in any season you look at. Now the question is, can he retain that type of production heading into this season? And the short answer is yes. 2 of the major contributing factors that led him to have a reduction in production: Nick Foles, no longer on the team, not a threat to take over as the starting quarterback for Gardner Minshew. If Minshew does get hurt though, the backup quarterback is probably not going to be as capable. But that shouldn't really be a fear on the back of anybody's mind. That pretty much hits and impacts all receivers across the board the exact same way. Rarely will you find a wide receiver who would be unimpacted by the starting quarterback going down and having to rely on a backup. But the second reason, him being injured with that ankle sprain towards the tail end of the last season, he's heading into 2020 completely healthy. In fact, all news blurbs and reports that are coming out of camp are suggesting that he has been having an outstanding offseason. The defense is also significantly worse than it was a season ago. Even though they ranked 21st in points allowed per game, they got rid of major names on the defensive side of the ball they're just not going to have on the field or available to them for this upcoming year. It's almost a guarantee that the pass attempts for this team are going to increase just based off of need in the third and the fourth quarter. And they also got rid of Leonard Fournette, which, say what you want about Leonard Fournette, he was still their best running back on the team. I don't think anybody behind him really has a true shot at being anything like Leonard Fournette could be with the given workload. So it's less likely that they are going to be able to rely on the run game. The defense significantly worse means overall more opportunities for this passing game. So the only real risk or concern you should have with DJ Chark is the potential of him being a one-year wonder. I think from what we've seen from his athletic profile, his measurables, his college tape, as well as what we were able to see from him in his sophomore season, we know enough that that is not the case. He was a good prospect heading into last year's fantasy draft. We're talking about a 6'3", 200-pound receiver with a solid college breakout age, a 98th percentile 40-yard dash time coming in at 4.34, 96th percentile percentile speed score and 93rd percentile burst score. These are numbers we just rarely see coming out of the draft. He does have high draft capital also in his favor, coming in as a second round pick just a few seasons ago. And he's also heading into that third year, which has typically been the breakout year. So he also has that going in his favor. So at the end of the day, DJ Chark makes an amazing target in drafts. If you have not drafted him this year, you'll probably wish that you did. But let's move into the next player. The next wide receiver you should have drafted is Robert Woods of the LA Rams. Currently in ESPN drafts, you can get Robert Woods as the 24th wide receiver off of the board. So that means people are getting him at a deal of a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and that is incredible value. Over the past 2 seasons, he's actually finished as the wide receiver 17 and the wide receiver 10 in half PPR leagues. So if you're getting him anywhere near the wide receiver 24, you're basically getting him at his floor. We know that's his floor because he scored a total of 2 touchdowns last season. 2 touchdowns is much lower than the expectation you're going to get for an 1,100 plus yard receiver, something he has proven to be over each of the past 2 years. His first year with the Rams, not so hot, but we know with free agent receivers, they typically take 1 year to get settled into the offense, build chemistry and timing with the quarterback, and then usually in that second and third year is when they start to blossom and perform consistently to what you would expect them to. The team also felt comfortable enough to let go of Brandin Cooks, who was a solid contributor for them for a couple of years now. And while Robert Woods' target share is a virtual guarantee and a lock, and Brandin Cooks being on the team or off the team would not really impact the floor that he has when it comes to his target market share, it does overall impact his potential ceiling. With Brandin Cooks' targets in this offense up for grabs, we know other players are going to have to step up, whether that be Cooper Kupp increasing his targets, more involvement for Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett like most people are expecting. Robert Woods, while we do know he is going to get somewhere around 130 targets, the potential for him to have even more is definitely a possible outcome. When you factor in that this is also a player who had 2 receiving touchdowns last season with the potential to have even more targets, you find yourself targeting and drafting one of the highest safe floor receivers that you can get in this range that actually has some hidden upside. One of the best reasons for targeting Robert Woods is because we usually suggest you go RB heavy in the early rounds just due to the lack of workhorse running backs in the league. So having the ability to draft Robert Woods as your wide receiver 1 and knowing you won't be truly disappointed if he plays at his floor, that's a great investment to make, especially when you consider the potential upside he could bring to your team as well. Most people aren't talking about his upside, but we can all agree about his safety, and for those reasons, he is definitely a player we believe you should have drafted. The next player we have is Terry McLaurin out of Washington. We can add his name into the hat as well of wide receivers who performed well in 2019 who just aren't getting as much respect as they deserve, because Terry McLaurin, he really does fit into that bill. As a rookie, he showed an ability to command targets from 3 different quarterbacks that started for this team. Washington last year, they started off the season with Case Keenum as the starting quarterback. In 4 of Keenum's first 5 games, Terry McLaurin, he caught a total of 5 receiving touchdowns. The one game in between then, where Case Keenum wasn't the starter, there was Colt McCoy in week 5 playing against New England. Colt McCoy was shut down, as most quarterbacks were against New England's stout defense, especially at that part of the season. So he shouldn't really hold it all together against McLaurin for not putting up a massive game. He did, however, command 7 targets, right on par with the targets he was receiving under Case Keenum, and did convert that into 3 receptions for 51 yards. 6.6 fantasy points, not going to automatically blow you out of the water, but not a complete dud either, especially against a tough New England defense. Then 3 of his best games on the entire year actually came under Dwayne Haskins in weeks 14, 15, and 16. In those contests, he averaged 15.8 fantasy points per game. His lowest actual fantasy performance was 12.1 half PPR fantasy points. So this proves that no matter who the starting quarterback is, he is going to be able to perform. Right now, Dwayne Haskins is listed as the starter, but we don't know if that could translate to Alex Smith, who would actually potentially even boost the fantasy production we could expect from Terry McLaurin. Either way, this is just a nod to his safety, and we know that as an individual contributor, he can bring the upside as well. He posted the league's best contested catch rate out of all receivers, not just rookies. He ranked 11th in production premium, 2nd in target premium, and 2nd in dominator rating. His quarterback rating when targeting still ranked in the top 10 as well, so this was altogether a really solid player on a bad team. Their defense does have the ability to be a bit more improved, but there will certainly be in situations where they need to rely on their best weapons, and Terry McLaurin is easily their best offensive piece. Head coach Ron Rivera has already come out and touted that Terry McLaurin has been impressing all offseason. Terry McLaurin has also been giving credit to Dwayne Haskins in his improvement. So all signs, they're pointing to positivity. Right now, you can draft Terry McLaurin as a back and wide receiver too, which we think is a great value. And if you haven't drafted yet, try to get him on your team. If you have already drafted though, we do believe he is a receiver you'll wish you had drafted. The fourth player we have on this list is Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans. Now, I do understand he had a very bad season. Anyone that drafted him last year definitely got burnt, and he was looked at as one of the safer picks in the draft. For that though, I do believe a lot of recency bias is baked into his ADP. Right now, I can understand why Will Fuller is being drafted ahead of him. Clearly, he does have a chemistry built with Deshaun Watson. He is the likely favorite to lead this team when it comes to a receiving standpoint, but Brandin Cooks, his ADP still should not be that low. I mean, neither should Will Fuller's at all, but Will Fuller at least has a huge injury risk attached to his name. Now, Brandin Cooks was injured last season, and he does have an increased risk of concussions, maybe derailing his total games played or holding him out for an extended period of time. Prior to last season, when he was dealing with those injuries, he played in all 16 games each of the past 4 seasons. The last game he had actually missed was in his rookie season, and despite him having the moniker of an injury-prone player last season, he did suit up for 14 games and have the ability to start in 11 of those. So yes, the production wasn't all there, the targets weren't all there, but he has shown us enough throughout his entire career for us to know that he actually is a player who still has it. People don't realize this is a receiver who is just 26 years old, entering his physical prime. Over the past 4 years, excluding last season, he has averaged 119 targets, converting those to 77 receptions, 1,148 receiving yards to go with 7 touchdowns per year. Now you're putting him on a team that lost over 150 targets a season ago, losing their alpha wide receiver. The main other receiver on this team that's competing with him for overall targets is Will Fuller, who does have more upside, I will admit, but I think if you're looking for safety and you want a player who is guaranteed to outproduce his draft day price tag, I think you need not look any further than Brandin Cooks for 2020. You won't find him being drafted inside the top 30 wide receivers on any platform, and for us, that's an amazing value and definitely a player you will have wished you drafted. Before I do get into the final player, just a quick couple of honorable mentions is Odell Beckham and Calvin Ridley, both players who are almost lined up to outproduce what they did in 2019. Odell Beckham, a free agent wide receiver that season, whose draft day price tag is now coming in at a discount for burning owners a season ago. Calvin Ridley being on the team that is massively leading in vacated targets. You can see our breakdowns on those players in several videos we posted on them throughout this offseason, or you can get access to that in our draft package at thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that in the description box below. But let's get into the final player. And the final player I know a lot of you guys won't agree with, but it's Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots. Now, because Tom Brady's leaving, understandably, the overall upside he's going to have for a player who has largely been looked at as a safe floor player, it's going to be a bit lower. We're also not denying that, but we do have to understand where the value is coming in. And when he's being drafted outside of the top 30 wide receivers, in some platforms outside of the top 36 wide receivers, we have to be able to identify that, look past the overall loss of Brady, and know that this is still a player coming in at a good value. If there's one thing that we've learned from the Patriots this offseason, is that this run game is probably going to be a mess. Sony Michel, he was injured throughout this entire offseason. We were unsure if he was going to start the season on the pup. Now it's likely that he's going to start this season, but he may not be the best option because Damian Harris has been a standout in practice. Now Damian Harris has suffered an injury, and they have Lamar Miller, who finally reached the field. So it is a giant mess over here. Nothing we can rely on in the run game. We can't guarantee that they will have consistency or success in that area, but we do know that there is consistency and likely going to be success at the quarterback position with Cam Newton. Cam Newton has been able to sustain positive fantasy weapons throughout his career. Think Kelvin Benjamin at the wide receiver position a few years back. Then you have Greg Olsen, who has consistently been a check down option, running similar routes to that of Julian Edelman. And then also to know that he is proficient in these short and intermediate routes, you have the recent success of Christian McCaffrey. These are the types of throws that we know that Cam Newton can make somewhat consistently, and although we don't expect for Julian Edelman to be a top 12 receiver in PPR, maybe that's his ceiling, for him to be drafted outside the top 30 wide receivers, we think he can easily outproduce that and play consistently for your team early and often. Right now we have him ranked as the wide receiver 27, which means if he's falling anywhere near his current ADP, we're more than happy pulling the trigger in that area. And we think just due to the shakeup in this offense, he just largely has been the forgotten man. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.